So, welcome to European History with Dr. Brovkin, AP European History, and sometimes Russian history included in this. But today we actually begin a series of lectures about one of the most important periods in European history, which is called the Age of Enlightenment. So, the Age of Enlightenment is basically from the beginning of the century to the French Revolution, even though it does continue in some way or another especially in Germany further on. There's no strict delineation when it ends, but it sort of slowly transitions after the French Revolution into the age of Romanticism. So that's pretty much like it is. The first half of 19th century is Romanticism, but all of 18th century is Age of Enlightenment. It is called Age of Enlightenment because there are new ideas. As I just mentioned, new ideas. For the first time, Europe produces new philosophical ideas, and the crowning result of it is the publishing of Encyclopédie by Diderot, and I'm going to talk separately about it. But this is the first time when you have knowledge accumulated and published in one place with 7 volumes in all fields of knowledge, in physics, in Newton, in astrology, astronomy, I mean, philosophy, mathematics, everything. This is the first time that knowledge actually becomes a goal of an intellectual community. So as we go along, we will actually focus on specific thinkers, especially people like Voltaire and Diderot and Rousseau, the famous one, Montesquieu, but also lesser known ones, Helveticus, Holbach, and several other ones. And then with your reports about the English thinkers, then we will have an idea of this incredible age. Now, obviously, it's clear that the Age of Enlightenment is primarily French. However, not exactly. I mean, the philosophers had absolutely astounding influence on the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and shaped the intellectual climate all over Europe. But we shall also talk about the German Enlightenment and German literature, Schiller and Goethe, and German philosopher Kant, who really, stay as important in shaping the ideas and the new perceptions and realities as do the French. In other words, it's a fascinating period of intellectual history that truly shaped modern world. But we begin with social order in France and the kind of chronological perspective of the content and the context of France in early 18th century. So in 1715, Louis XIV is dead, and a child who is his grandson of 5 years old becomes king, and that is Louis XV. And the first 8 years are years of regency, where you have a government which is run by one of the noble families related to the king. And there's nothing particular about this government, except there are new things that begin to happen in France, and that is the connected with the name John Law, Law. He's a Scottish man, and he comes to France, he becomes a French citizen, and he produced a very important impact on economic growth in France. So these are the years of boom years, this fast economic development of France that would continue even after Law. So what we have to explain is what was new about something that is known in history as the law system. Okay, so John Law basically was a banker, and he introduced something that is totally obvious now, but was new at the time, and that is basically paper money. Money was in the form of gold and silver, but he said that it's not necessary really to carry gold and silver if you have a bank that is backed by the power of the state. You could actually give pieces of paper that says such and such a person is entitled to such and such an amount of gold, and that paper money would be accepted because people would trust this bank. and it worked. He created a bank, and then a couple of years later, it was called Bank Royal. The king, I mean, the regent backed it. The most important innovation that wasn't really laws, but this has already been practiced in Amsterdam, which was the banking center of Europe, and in Geneva, was something that every bank does it all the time, which is that uh, the amount of money you have uh, is not what you use. You give loans, and what every bank today is allowed to have is only 10% should be covered by the holdings of the bank. In other words, 90% is given out in loans even though you don't have that money. So all banks do it all the time in the assumption that no holder, not all of them will come at the same time and demand their money. And if they do, then the bank goes crushing down and goes bankrupt. But it almost never happens because they find a way to reschedule the loans. In other words, what law system is modern banking. It essentially makes it possible to extend credit much more than the actual holdings of real money. And that is what modern banks do. So he uses paper money, he establishes a Bank Royal, and then he establishes also French Ost India Company. Uh, and that happens at the time when the French established New Orleans, which is 1720. And as you had seen the map, it connects with Quebec and with Canada, and you have a Nouvelle France, which covers most of North American continent. And they extraordinary success. He sells bonds and stocks of this new company, and everybody is in a kind of a gold rush to go to Louisiana and to Nouvelle France, and it just picks up the speed. And within several years, you have a French colony that essentially spans all of North American continent. If it went this way with that speed, it would have posed a serious challenge to the British settlements along the Atlantic coast of North America. But after a few years, the company went into overdrive and collapsed. And with it, collapsed John's system, and Mr. Law had to retire. An interesting fact is that Peter the Great invited him to come to Russia and run the Russian finances, and he refused. He basically retired to his estate. However, the most important point is that even though the bank collapsed, the system did not. This continued to be the standard procedure for modern banking. And the first half of 18th century saw extraordinary, very fast development of French industry, commerce, shipping, especially with the Caribbean and the North America. So here's just one fact. In 1715, there were 300 commercial ships in France, and by 1760, there was 1,800. So several times over, France had actually a fast commercial fleet. Moreover, speaking of fleet, France was building a great military force as the French Navy. It was still, some people say, inferior to the English Navy, but it was just about as good. And those of you who have studied the American Revolution would know that Admiral de Grasse defeated British Admiral Hugh, I think his name was, and secured American independence by essentially defeating the English fleet near Yorktown. It was the French victory on the seas and the French victory by General Rochambeau that secured Washington's army's victory and secured American independence. In other words, France does become a major commercial and military power in this first half of the 18th century. And that's largely thanks to the system introduced by Mr. Law. So it produces new system of credit, new system of banking, And don't forget, tell your friends to subscribe to AP European History with Dr. Brovkin and to put their likes and to subscribe. Thank you.